We had ignored the warnings. Locals spoke of missing hikers, their words edged with something I could not name, but warnings were easy to dismiss when adventure called. The others walked ahead, their packs shifting with each step. The trail had started as a marked path, but now, deeper in, the signs were gone. The trees loomed closer, their trunks gnarled and cracked. The hush of the forest stretched wide around us, as though the land itself had drawn in a breath. Then we found the tents. They stood in a small clearing, fabric rippling in the light breeze, zips undone, flaps open. Sleeping bags lay inside, half unrolled. Boots sat neatly beside them, water bottles half full, bags unrifled. The air held no trace of life, no tracks in the dirt, no sign of struggle. I stepped closer, my breath shallow. I reached out, touching the edge of one tent. The fabric was dry, undamaged. The absence of decay suggested the owners had not been gone long, but there were no answers. We stayed together after that. The forest deepened, the light drained from the sky, swallowed by thickening branches. Our GPS screens flickered, then froze. Phones lost signal. Compass needles spun, refusing to settle. The silence was no longer still. We walked faster, then someone vanished. A single scream split the air, sharp, cutting through the trees. We turned, searching, but he was gone. The space where he had stood was empty, no sound of footsteps, no crackle of disturbed leaves. Another cry, further ahead. We ran. Shapes blurred between the trees. The path twisted, narrowed. The forest pressed in. My pulse crashed against my ribs. Another gone. I stumbled, my breath burning. Shapes darted at the edges of my vision, moving too fast to follow. A flash of fabric. A pack dropping to the ground, a hand reaching, then snatched away. Then silence, the dark thickened, swallowing all light. I ran, no longer knowing where the trail lay. My lungs ached, my legs burned. I could feel the space around me shift, something moving, unseen, following, closing in. Then the ground fell away. I tumbled, arms flailing, rocks tearing at my skin. I landed hard, my back slamming against something cold, flat. My breath choked in my throat. I was inside. The air was still. The walls pressed close, metal beneath my palms. A bunker. I pushed myself up, limbs shaking. The dark was absolute, thick and endless. My breath rasped loud against the walls. My fingers fumbled over rough surfaces, searching. Then a click, sharp, distinct, in the blackness behind me. I froze. A second click, closer. The space seemed smaller now, the air pressing tighter. Then a rush of movement and the dark swallowed me whole. The corridor stretched ahead, long and quiet, the walls pale under the flickering lights. I walked with measured steps, the scent of disinfectant sharp in my nose. The doors on either side stood shut, hiding the frail lives within. Mother's room was near the end, a small number printed on the door. I pressed inside and found her lying still, her hands folded over the blanket. She looked at me with tired eyes, her skin thin and colorless. Her arms rested above the sheets, and that was when I saw them. Dark blotches, blooming beneath her paper-like skin. The bruises ran from her wrists to her elbows, spreading in unnatural patterns. My chest tightened as I reached out, brushing my fingers lightly over one. She did not react. My breath came quick as I turned her arm, revealing more marks, some faded, some fresh. I left the room, moving through the halls, my pulse drumming in my ears. The nurse at the front desk glanced up as I stopped before her. Her face was empty, her eyes dull. I pointed to the bruises, demanding an explanation. She only blinked, then gave a soft shake of her head. "Patients this age bruised easily," she said. "It was nothing to be concerned about." I clenched my fists, but said no more. There was something behind her gaze, something far colder than the indifference she showed me. That night, long after the building had quietened, I returned. The back door yielded to a simple push. The hallways were darker now, the hum of machines the only sound. I stepped carefully, avoiding the patches of dim light cast from the open doors of sleeping patients. I moved forward, deeper into the home. Then I saw him. A figure stood bent over an elderly woman, his back turned to me. A thin tube ran from a syringe to her arm. His fingers worked the plunger, pressing something into her veins. I swallowed hard, my pulse rising. The woman did not stir. She lay still beneath the white sheets, her chest barely lifting. My hands clenched as I watched the staff member straighten, turn, and move to the next bed. Another syringe, another injection. My body moved before my mind caught up. I reached for my phone, but the grip on my wrist came too fast. A second figure loomed from the dark. The sting came sharp in my arm. I gasped, my body seizing as heat rushed through my veins. The floor tilted, my legs failed. Darkness took me. I woke with straps biting into my skin. My limbs would not move. A ceiling stretched above, flat and yellowed. The air smelled sweet, too sweet. My head swam as I turned it sluggish, my vision swimming. Rows of beds lined the room. Shapes lay beneath the covers. Silent, motionless. My breath caught in my throat. Mother was among them. Her chest did not rise. Her mouth hung open, a faint trickle of something dark at the corner. I strained against the restraints, my skin burning where the straps dug in. A low beeping filled the air, slow, steady. Machines surrounded me, wires trailing from my skin. Footsteps clicked against the linoleum. A shadow fell over me. A pair of gloved hands reached down, pressing cool fingers against my arm. Something sharp pushed into my skin. A second dose, a final dose. My thoughts blurred, the room tipping. The bodies around me remained still. The machines continued their slow, steady hum. And then nothing. The rideshare app pinged. A car was outside. The driver's picture matched the one on my phone, so I hopped into the back seat, glad to be heading home after a long day. I sank into the seat, finally relaxing. Everything seemed normal for a bit. The car moved smoothly, the streetlights flickered past, and I started to unwind. Then I glanced at the GPS. The little blue line was taking us a way I didn't recognize. I knew this area pretty well, and surely this wasn't the fastest way home. A jolt of worry shot through me. I tried to keep calm, thinking maybe there was traffic or roadworks I didn't know about, but the further we went, the more remote the road became. Streetlights vanished, replaced by dark fields either side. Quickly, I tapped out a text to my friend, including my location, hoping she'd see it if something went badly. I pressed send just as the driver twisted around in his seat. His eyes locked onto my phone. In a swift movement, he snatched it from my hand. Panic bloomed in my chest. My heart hammered. I stared at him, speechless, as he tossed my phone onto the passenger seat. There, a horrible sight awaited me. Piled high were other phones, all cracked and broken, their screens dark. We drove past an old petrol station, empty and decaying, weeds growing through the cracked tarmac. The car doors clicked, locking with a solid final sound. My breath hitched. I was trapped. I looked at the driver again. He didn't say a word. He just grinned. The job seemed easy enough. Night security at an Olympic swimming pool. Just wandering about, making sure nothing untoward happened. The pool was deserted at night, not a soul around, or so I thought. The splashing began on my second night. Just a faint sound, like someone doing lengths. But the building was empty. I checked all the doors, all locked and bolted as they should be. I told myself it was just the pipes, or maybe my imagination playing tricks. The next night, the splashing returned. It persisted for hours. Annoyed, I decided to check the security cameras. I went back to the security office and rewound the footage from the pool area. A figure. That's all I can describe it as. A blurry form rising out of the deep end. It hovered near the surface, facing the cameras. I could make out nothing in detail. Just a general human shape. It just stared. Then, with no warning, it sank back down, disappearing into the depths. My blood ran cold. I replayed the footage again and again. The figure was there, plain as day, yet completely indistinct. It defied any logical explanation. Who or what was swimming in the pool in the dead of night? The following nights were torture. Every shift was punctuated by the splashing. Each time I found myself glued to the security monitors, searching for the figure. It never reappeared on camera, but I could not shake the image from my mind. The way it stared, sleep became a luxury. I tossed and turned, haunted by the blurry shape in the water. I started seeing things in the corners of my eyes, imagining the figure lurking just out of sight. My nerves were frayed. Tonight, I decided I would confront it. I couldn't take it anymore. The splashing had been particularly constant tonight, driving me to the edge. I grabbed my torch and headed towards the pool. The air around the pool felt different, colder. The usual chemical smell seemed stronger, almost overpowering. The water shimmered under the dim emergency lights, looking black and bottomless. The splashing had stopped. I walked around the edge, my torch beam cutting through the darkness. Everything was still silent except for the faint dripping of condensation. Then I noticed something floating near the drain at the deep end. Hair. Long, dark strands of hair, swirling gently in the water. My stomach lurched. Where had it come from? I knelt down, extending my hand to get a better look. As I leaned closer, the water erupted. Something grabbed my arm, a cold, powerful grip that sent a jolt of terror through my body. I lost my balance and tumbled forward, plunging into the icy water. Darkness, icy cold, all-consuming darkness. I flailed wildly, trying to get my bearings, but the grip on my arm was unrelenting, pulling me down, down, down. I could feel hair wrapping around my face, clinging to my skin. I kicked and struggled, but it was no use. Whatever had me was stronger, faster. I could sense it beside me, a dark shape in the inky black. Then everything went silent. The day was awful from the start, grey sky pressing down like the whole world noticed something bad had happened. It had. My brother Tom was gone. They said it was quick, a sudden thing, too quick for any of us. Now we were all gathered in this room, the air smelling of flowers, too many flowers. His coffin sat there, dark wood, closed tight. I walked past it, touching the top, cold, so cold. A man in a dark suit found me after the service. He had a kind face, but his eyes were serious. He said he was the one who prepared Tom. The embalmer, he called himself. He spoke quietly, his voice low, telling me it was better this way, the coffin shut. Safer, he said. He used other words too, about how Tom looked peaceful now, but I knew he meant something else. Something not peaceful. I just nodded. What else could I do? Everyone left. My mum and dad went home, faces empty. My sister too, her eyes red and puffy. I stayed behind. The room was quiet now, just the scent of flowers, stronger than ever. And the coffin, it sat there, solid and final. They wanted us to remember Tom as he was, not as he ended up, but all I could think about was what the embalmer had said. Better this way, safer. What did he really mean? Guilt twisted inside me. I had not seen Tom properly before, not really said goodbye. A closed box was not goodbye. It felt cold, distant, like he was already gone long before now. I should look, I thought. I needed to see him, just once, to make it real. To say goodbye properly, to his face. The lid of the coffin was held down with screws, small shiny things. I found a tool in a cupboard at the back of the room near the door, a screwdriver. It felt heavy in my hand. My fingers trembled as I placed the tip on the head of the first screw. It turned with a grating sound. One by one I loosened them, my breath catching in my throat with each turn. The wood creaked as the last screw came free. I stopped. My heart beat fast, too fast. Maybe I should not do this. Maybe the embalmer was right, but the guilt was stronger. I had to see him. Leaning over, I lifted the lid, inch by slow inch. The scent of flowers rushed out, sickly sweet now, almost overpowering. And then I could see. It was Tom. But not Tom as I knew him. His skin was the wrong color, pale and waxy. His eyes were shut tight, pressed so firmly together. His mouth was open, wide open, pulled back at the corners like he was screaming. But there was no sound, just the silent scream frozen on his face. His hands were folded across his chest. I pulled one out gently. The skin was cold like stone. His fingers were curled inwards, tight. I turned his hand over. Underneath his nails, the tips of his fingers were red and raw. Blood, dried dark blood. I dropped his hand, stumbling back. My breath came in gasps. His face, the scream, the blood. What had happened? This was not peaceful. This was not right. Something awful had happened to Tom, something they were hiding. I had to tell someone, the priest. He was still here, in the church next door. I ran out of the room, out of the building, into the grey daylight. The church was just a short walk, a large stone building. I pushed open the heavy door and went inside. It was dim and quiet after the bright outside. The priest was there, in a room to the side. He looked up as I came in, his face calm. I tried to speak, my words rushing out, jumbled. About Tom, about the coffin, about his face, the scream, the blood under his nails. The priest listened, his face unchanging. When I finished, he just smiled, a small, gentle smile. He said I was upset, grieving. He said these things were hard to see, hard to understand when you were in pain. He told me to try and remember Tom as he was in life, not in death. He used soft words, comforting words, but he did not believe me. He thought I was imagining things, seeing things that were not there because I was sad. He patted my hand, told me to go home to rest. There was nothing to worry about, he said. Everything was all right, but it was not all right. I knew it. I had seen it. Tom's face, the blood. I went home. The house was quiet. My parents and sister were resting, they said. I went to my room, but I could not rest. I just sat on the bed. The image of Tom's face burned into my mind. That silent scream. And the blood. It kept playing over and over, like a bad dream you cannot wake from. As dark came, the house grew quieter still. Everyone was asleep, except me. I was still sitting on the bed, staring into the dark. The guilt was back, stronger now. I should not have opened the coffin. Maybe the embalmer was right. Maybe I should have left it closed. But I had seen it now, and I could not forget. Sleep would not come. My mind raced, going over and over everything. Tom's last days, what he had been like. Had he been ill? Had something happened? I tried to think back, to remember anything different, anything unusual, but there was nothing. Just normal life. And then suddenly he was gone. The house was silent, too silent. I could hear the ticking of the clock downstairs, the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. And something else. A tiny sound, so faint I almost missed it, a scratching. It was very quiet, a small scraping sound. I sat up straighter, listening. Was it just the house settling? Old houses made noises at night, but this was different. It was a distinct sound, a scratching, like something small, sharp, scraping against wood. I held my breath, listening harder. There it was again. A little louder now, clearer. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was coming from downstairs, from the direction of the front room where they had held the service, where Tom's coffin still was. My heart started to pound faster and faster. It could not be. It was just my imagination, my nerves playing tricks on me. But the sound came again and again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I got out of bed, my legs shaky. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I walked to the door. I opened it slowly, peering out into the dark hallway. Silence, except for the scratching, fainter now, but still there, coming from downstairs. I moved to the top of the stairs, looking down into the darkness. The scratching was clearer now, distinct, definite, not imagination, not nerves, real. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was coming from the front room, from where the coffin was. My breath caught in my throat. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped me. I knew then. I knew what the sound was and where it was coming from. It was from inside the coffin. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound went on, unending, and I stood there at the top of the stairs, frozen, listening to the scratching from my brother's coffin. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The crying noises began soon after we moved into the old house. At night time, when everything else was still, we could hear it. A faint, soft sound, like someone very sad coming from below, at ground level, under our bedroom. We told each other it was just the house settling. Old houses make noises, creaks and groans, little sounds as the wood gets used to the nighttime chill. We tried to believe it. We really did, but this was not a creaking house. This was a crying house. It was always the same. Starting once it got dark, going on for hours, not loud, just there. A low, mournful sound, like a child upset but trying not to be too noisy about it, from right beneath the floorboards of our room. We walked around the room, trying to pinpoint exactly where it came from. Near the corner, by the bed, if we put our ear to the floor, it was definitely clearer. From under there, from inside the ground below the house. It bothered me more than my partner, I think. They could sleep through almost anything, but I would lie awake, listening, trying to decide what it was, trying not to think of what it sounded like. Someone crying, someone upset and alone. We lived with it for a bit. Days turned into a week, then another. Every night the same thing, the quiet crying from under the floor. We got used to it in a way, not comfortable, but used to it. Like a bad song you cannot get out of your head. It is still annoying, but you know it is there. Then one morning I got up and I noticed something odd. On the floor by the corner of the room where the noises from were marks. Darker patches on the wood floor. They looked wet. I went closer to look. They were definitely marks, as if something wet had been there, shaped a bit like footprints, small footprints, leading away from the edge of the room towards the bed, then stopping just by the side of the bed. My heart did a funny jump. Footprints inside our bedroom, and only by the corner where we heard the crying. It did not make any sense. We had not spilled anything. The dog had not been in the bedroom. Where had these wet footprints come from? I called my partner over to look. They saw them and frowned. They agreed. They looked like footprints, small ones, and they were damp, not soaking, but definitely not dry. We touched them, and our fingers came away a little bit wet. We followed the marks back to the corner, right to the edge of the floorboards. And that was when we noticed it. The floorboard in that corner looked slightly different from the others, a bit older maybe, or just a different piece of wood. And there was a tiny gap around the edge of it. We got down on our knees and examined it properly. Yes, there was a gap, not big, but enough to see. And coming from that gap, we could smell something. A cold, earthy smell, like damp soil. Could the noises be coming from under the floorboards, from under that floorboard? And could these wet footprints be somehow linked to it? It was all starting to feel very strange, very unsettling. That night, the crying came again. Just as quiet, just as mournful from the same corner of the room. But now it was different. Now we knew about the footprints. Now we knew about the gap in the floorboards. It felt much worse. We lay in bed listening, both of us awake now. Neither of us saying anything, but both of us thinking about the same thing. What was under the floor? What was making those noises? And what had made those wet footprints in our bedroom? We decided we had to know. We could not just ignore it any longer. It was too strange, too creepy. We had to look under that floorboard to see what was there. The next day, we waited until nighttime again. When the crying noises would start, we got some tools ready, a screwdriver, a small crowbar, things to help us lift the floorboard. We felt a bit silly, but we also felt very nervous. As darkness fell, the crying noises started. Just like every other night, soft, sad, and from under the corner floorboard. We waited a bit, letting the noises get really going. Then we took a deep breath and started. Carefully, we used the screwdriver to get into the gap around the floorboard. It was old wood, and it moved a bit. Then we used the crowbar gently to try to lift it. It groaned as it came loose. Dust puffed out from the edges. The smell of damp earth got stronger. Finally, with a bit of a struggle, the floorboard came up. We lifted it away and put it to one side. We peered down into the hole. It was dark, very dark. We could not see anything at all at the bottom. We used a torch to shine light down into the space. The beam of light went down and down. It seemed very deep. The space under the floor was not just empty ground. It was a hole, a proper hole going straight down into the earth, like a well, an old brick-lined well, right under our bedroom floor. The crying noises were definitely louder now the floorboard was up. They were coming from inside the well, from down in the dark. We shone the torch down again, moving it around the inside of the well. Brick walls, going down into blackness. Mud and dirt at the bottom as far as we could see. Nothing else, just the dark, the bricks, the mud and the crying noises. Then, as we looked again, something moved. Right at the bottom of the well, in the mud, something white. We focused the torch beam and saw it properly. It was a hand sticking up out of the mud at the bottom of the well. A white bony hand, like a skeleton's hand, with long thin fingers reaching upwards, reaching up towards us, out of the dark hole under our bedroom floor. The crying stopped. The hand stayed there, reaching, and we stared down into the well, unable to move, unable to speak, just staring at the white hand in the dark. The night shift at the petrol station was always quiet, but tonight felt different. From behind the till I could see the forecourt, brightly lit, a stark island in the dark. That's when I noticed him. A man standing just outside the edge of the light across the road. He was facing the station, facing me. It wasn't unusual to see people about, even late. We're open all hours, after all. Lorries sometimes pulled in for fuel, and the odd night owl would need snacks or drinks. But this man wasn't moving, just standing there. I kept busy wiping down the counter, sorting through the chocolate bars, anything to keep my mind occupied. Each time I glanced up, he was still there. Same position, facing the window. It started to feel strange, too still. Most people waiting outside would be looking at their phones or pacing or something. He was just there, like a statue. Minutes passed, maybe even half an hour. He hadn't shifted. My eyes kept getting drawn back to him. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Just someone waiting for a bus or a taxi or meeting someone. But there were no bus stops close by, and taxis were very rare out here at this hour. The digital clock above the crisps clicked over another minute. Still he stood. I began to feel a prickle of unease. It was a cold night. He should be inside, getting warm, buying a coffee maybe. I busied myself again, restocking the sweets near the door, anything to avoid looking out there. But the edge of my vision kept picking him up, always there, just outside the glow of the station lights. Eventually, curiosity, or maybe something else, made me check the security monitors. 4 small screens showed different views of the forecourt and the shop. I flicked to the camera that covered the front, the one that pointed directly at where he was standing. On the grainy black and white image, he was there, just as I'd seen him standing, facing the station. I glanced at the timestamp at the bottom of the screen. It matched the clock in the shop. He'd been there for a while already, according to the recording. I rewound the footage a little, using the controls below the screen, hoping to see him arrive. Walk across the road, something normal. The image flickered back. Cars passed on the main road in the background. The forecourt was empty. Then at precisely midnight, according to the timestamp that jumped forward a second, he was just there. One frame, the forecourt empty. The next, the man standing exactly as he was now. No walking into frame, no car pulling up, just appeared. My breath caught. I rewound it again and again. Each time the same. Vanished from one frame to the next, then suddenly present at midnight. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn night air seeping in every time someone opened the door. This wasn't right. It couldn't be right. Security cameras didn't miss things like that. They were designed to record everything. I stared at the monitor, then back out the window. He was still there, perfectly still. The rest of my shift seemed to drag. Every customer who came in, I served with a forced smile, my eyes flicking back to the window, to the man outside as soon as they left. He never moved, never changed his posture, just watched. I tried to focus on my tasks, on the routine of the job, but the image of him appearing on the security footage kept replaying in my mind, the sudden, impossible arrival. As the hours crept by towards morning, the sky outside began to lighten. The first hints of dawn painted the horizon a pale grey, and still he remained. Finally, my replacement arrived. Sarah, bright and cheerful as always, despite the early hour. I quickly briefed her on the till procedures, avoiding any mention of the man outside. I didn't want to sound mad. As I walked out of the door, pulling my coat tighter around me, I glanced across the road. He was still there. In the dim pre-dawn light, he looked even more stark, more unreal. I hurried to my car, unlocked it, got in, and locked the doors again immediately. As I started the engine, I looked one last time. He was still facing the station. Still, driving home, I kept checking my rear-view mirror, expecting to see him following. But the road behind was empty except for the usual early morning traffic starting to build. Once home, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Sleep felt impossible. Instead, I decided to look at the security footage again. Maybe I'd missed something, some explanation for what I'd seen. I logged into the station system remotely using the app on my phone. It took a few minutes to connect, then the familiar view of the forecourt appeared on the screen. I navigated to the recordings from last night, finding the midnight hour footage. There he was, appearing at midnight, just like before. I watched it again and again, trying to find any glitch, any error, anything to rationalize what I was seeing. But there was nothing, just empty forecourt. Then, instantly, the man. I scrolled through the rest of the night's footage, watching myself serve customers, tidy shelves, everything normal. Except for him, always there in the background, outside the window, unmoving. Then I noticed something else, something that made my blood run cold. I zoomed in on the monitor screen, my fingers trembling slightly as I pinched and expanded the image. It was the reflection in the glass of the shop door. In the footage from last night, as I moved around inside the station, my reflection was there as it should be, but behind my reflection, also visible in the glass, was another figure. A figure standing inside the shop, just behind me, a figure I hadn't seen all night. I adjusted the playback, watching myself move around in the recorded image, and there it was, clear as day, in every shot where the door reflection was visible. Standing right behind me, inside the shop, was the man from outside. He had been there all night, right behind me. On the security footage, he was inside, with me the whole time, but I never saw him, not once. All I saw was him outside the window. But in the recording, he was always right there. Night pressed tight around the cab as I drove. Motorway lights stretched out in front, disappearing where the black sky swallowed them up. Another long haul. Radio was off, just the engine noise and the tires on the road. Hours clicked by, same dark fields on either side, same empty road ahead. Then up ahead, shape by the verge, figure, someone needing a lift. Unusual place to be walking, middle of nowhere late at night. I eased off the pedal, indicator on, and pulled up on the hard shoulder a bit past him. Window down, looked across, man standing there. Face turned away, looking out at the field, still and silent. Coat collar up, no bag, nothing carried, just him. I waited a moment. He didn't move. Didn't acknowledge me at all. Perhaps hadn't noticed the truck. I leaned over, looked again. He must have seen the truck. Big thing to miss, maybe unsure. Some people were funny about trucks. I gave a small toot on the horn, just a polite one. Figure turned, looked at the cab, face pale in the darkness, eyes dark pools, no expression, just looked, then moved. Door opened, he got in, quiet, door shut, click of the belt, facing straight ahead, hands in his lap. Still, all right, I said, just to be polite. No reply, didn't even nod, just straight ahead, odd. Some people were shy or tired. Long night for everyone. I put the truck back in gear, pulled back onto the motorway, drove on. Miles passed, still quiet inside the cab. You'd think someone would say thanks for the lift at least, or where they were going. Nothing. I glanced over a few times. Each time the man was the same, looking straight ahead, not moving, not a twitch, like a statue put there on the seat. It was getting a bit strange now. Most people, even quiet ones, would fidget or look around. This bloke was like he wasn't even there, just a shape, but he was there. I could see him. Pale face in the side of my eye. Could feel him sitting next to me. Presence. Journey stretched on. Night seemed to get darker outside. Inside the cab it felt different. Colder maybe. Not temperature cold. Something else cold, like a draft you can't feel on your skin but you know is there. I checked the mirrors. Road behind empty. Road ahead empty. Just the truck pushing through the dark and the silent man beside me. I glanced again, still looking straight ahead. Then it happened, just like that. I glanced over. Empty seat, man gone, braked hard, truck lurched, pulled onto the shoulder, engine off. Silence apart from the ticking of the cooling engine. Heart thumped a bit in my chest. What just happened? Turned on the inside light, cab lit up, empty passenger seat, seatbelt hanging loose, no sign of him, nowhere to be seen. I stared at the seat. He was just there, moments ago, solid, real now. Gone. Where could he have gone? Doors were locked, windows shut, nowhere out. He couldn't just vanish. Got out of my seat, checked behind it, nothing. Looked on the floor, empty, checked the bunk behind the seats. Small space for naps on long journeys. Pulled the curtain back, dark and empty, no one there. Back into the driver's seat, switched on the inside light again, looked around the cab slowly. Dashboard, steering wheel, seats, floor, nothing, completely empty except for me and my stuff. Impossible, he was just here. I picked him up, he sat there, I saw him, felt him, now air. Like he was never there at all. Feeling odd now. Proper odd, like something wasn't right in my head. Was I dreaming? Had I imagined the whole thing? No, I knew I hadn't. I remember seeing him at the roadside, stopping. He got in, he sat right there. Unless I'd imagined it. Could my mind play tricks like that? Long hours on the road, tiredness, dark night, maybe. Maybe I just thought I picked someone up. Maybe there was no one there at all. That didn't feel right either. Felt too real. The figure by the road, the turn of his head, the feeling of him getting into the cab. The coldness, it all felt too real to be just a dream. Then I remembered. The dash cam. Small camera on the dashboard, always recording. For insurance in case of accidents. Records everything in the cab and on the road ahead. Never really looked at the footage before. Always just there, doing its job. Now it might show me what happened. Might show if I really picked someone up. Or if I'd just gone mad from driving too long. Reached up, fiddled with the dash cam, took out the memory card. Small thing, held the answer to what was going on in my hand. Got my phone out. Had an adapter for a memory cards, plugged it in. Found the video files, started playing them back, screen small but good enough. Footage of the road ahead, night driving, motorway lights, fields flashing past, engine noise loud in the recording. Me humming a bit to myself, sounds like. Just the road, nothing else. Fast forwarded a bit, same thing. Road, night, me driving, no other cars much, just empty motorway. Kept watching, waiting for the point where I stopped, where I picked up the man. There, see the shape by the verge on the recording, just like I remembered. Slowed the footage right down. Truck indicator on screen, braking lights, pulling onto the hard shoulder. Roadside figure clear now on the little screen. Shape of a man, standing still, just as I remembered. Footage shows me opening the window, me leaning over, looking at the man. Man turns to face the truck, just like I remembered. Footage matches what I recall exactly. Then, the man walks to the truck. Footage shows the passenger door opening. Door shuts again. Truck indicator off, pulling back onto the motorway. All in the video. Proof. I did pick him up. He was there. It wasn't a dream. Relief. And something else too. If the camera saw him, then he was real. But where did he go? How could he just vanish from a locked cab? Kept watching the footage, now driving. Road ahead on the screen. View of the cab too, in the corner of the recording. Shows me driving. My hands on the wheel, my face in profile. Empty passenger seat beside me. Empty! No one there, but I remember him being there. And the roadside figure, Rewound the footage back to when I stopped. Watched again. See myself looking to the side, see the figure turn, see the door open, door shut, pulling away. All there, all seems normal. Then watched the cab view in the corner of the screen, closely, from the moment I stopped. Watched as the figure at the roadside turned. Watched as... nothing. The passenger door did not open on the cab footage. No one got in. The seat stayed empty. All the time. The footage showed me looking to the side at empty space. Footage showed me opening the passenger door to nothing. Footage showed me shutting the door again and then driving off with an empty seat beside me. Watched further. Watched myself driving for miles and miles on the little screen. Cab view always there in the corner. Empty seat beside me. Always empty. But I remember talking to him, or at least talking. I remember saying, "All right," when he got in. I remember glancing over at him, remembering his presence. Turned the volume up on my phone. Listened to the recording of myself driving, engine noise, tires on the road, and voice. My voice, coming from the recorder, talking, just talking to no one. Listened to myself saying, "All right," to the empty seat. Listened to myself glancing over at the empty space again and again. Listened to myself driving for hours, talking to myself, to empty air beside me, thinking I was talking to someone who wasn't there, had never been there. The figure by the road. The man in the seat, never real, just in my head, but so real, so solid, until he vanished. But he hadn't vanished at all. He was never there to begin with, just me, alone, talking to no one in the dark cab, driving through the long night, still driving now, still alone. I've never been one for nighttime fears, but lately I can't help but feel a sense of dread as the clock ticks closer to 2:37 a.m. It started a week ago when my TV began flickering to static, always at the same time. I thought it was just a signal issue, but then I saw something in the static, a shadow growing clearer each night. At first I tried to ignore it, but last night things took a turn for the worse. I was lying in bed when I heard a low hum coming from the living room. I got up to investigate and saw that the TV had turned on by itself. The static was there, but this time it was different. A man was standing in my living room, unmoving, his face obscured by the snowy interference. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things, but when I looked again, he was still there. I turned around, expecting to find someone standing behind me, but the room was empty. I quickly turned back to the TV, and my heart skipped a beat. The man was walking toward me, his form growing clearer with each step. I stumbled backward, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I just watched as the man came closer, his eyes fixed on me, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, the static vanished and the screen went black. I stood there for a moment, my heart racing, my mind reeling. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a glitch in the TV, but I knew that wasn't true. I'd seen him, the man in the static. I didn't sleep at all last night, and when the clock struck 2:37 a.m. again, I was ready. I sat in front of the TV, my eyes glued to the screen, and then, just as before, the static flickered to life. This time the man was already there, standing in my living room, his face clear and unmistakable. He was tall, with dark hair and piercing eyes. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. I reached for the remote, my hands shaking, and turned up the volume. The man didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, watching me. I could feel his gaze, even though I couldn't see his eyes. It was as if he was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand. And then, without warning, the man began to move. He walked toward me, his steps slow and deliberate. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short gasps. I tried to move, to run, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place. The man came closer, his face looming larger on the screen, and then, just as he was about to reach me, the static vanished again and the screen went black. I sat there for a moment, my heart racing, my mind reeling. I knew what I had seen, and I knew it wasn't a trick of the light or a glitch in the TV. The man in the static was real, and he was coming for me. I didn't sleep at all last night, and when the clock struck 2:37 a.m. again, I was ready. I sat in front of the TV, my eyes glued to the screen, and this time I wasn't afraid. The static flickered to life. And there he was, the man in the static, standing in my living room, but this time something was different. He wasn't alone. There were others with him, shadows in the static growing clearer with each passing moment. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short gasps. But I didn't move, didn't speak. I just watched as the shadows came closer, their forms growing clearer with each step. And then, just as before, the static vanished and the screen went black. But this time I knew it wasn't over. The man in the static was still out there, watching me, waiting for his chance to strike. I don't know what will happen next, but I know one thing for sure. I will never forget the man in the static, and I will never let my guard down again, because I know that he's still out there, waiting for me, watching me, ready to strike at any moment, and I know that I can never escape the terror of the man in the static. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind that soaks a person to the bone in mere moments. I was driving my taxi through the deserted streets when I saw her, a lone figure, drenched, her dress clinging to her thin frame. I pulled over and she quickly got in, giving me an address. We drove in silence, the only sound the wipers swishing back and forth. I could feel her eyes on me, but I didn't dare look. There was something about her that made me uneasy. The streets were slick with rain, and I drove carefully. But when we arrived at the destination, I couldn't believe what I saw. The back seat was empty, but it was clear that someone had been there. The leather was soaked, water pooling on the floor. I spun around, but there was no one there. I jumped out of the car and ran to the door, pounding on it until a light came on. A woman answered, her face etched with worry. She asked if I was the one who had picked up her daughter. I nodded, confused. She told me that her daughter had drowned in a car accident 10 years ago on the same night every year. She said that every year someone comes to pick her up, but when they arrive, she's gone. I didn't know what to say. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I drove home in a daze, the rain still coming down hard. I couldn't get the image of that soaked back seat out of my mind. The next day, I couldn't focus on anything but the woman and her story. I decided to go back to the house to see if I could find out more. The woman answered the door again, and I could see the sadness in her eyes. She invited me in, and we sat in her living room. She told me that every year, on the anniversary of her daughter's death, she sees a taxi pull up to the house. She said that she's never been able to see the driver, but she can hear the car door open and close. She said that she's never been able to find her daughter, but she knows that she's gone. I didn't know what to think. I wanted to tell her that it was all just a coincidence, that there had to be some other explanation. But I couldn't. I knew what I had seen, and I couldn't deny it. As I left the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I looked around, but there was no one there. The air was thick with foreboding, and I couldn't wait to get away. I drove home, my mind racing. I couldn't stop thinking about the woman and her daughter. I couldn't stop thinking about that soaked back seat. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I tried to put it out of my mind, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that back seat, soaked with water. Every time I heard a car door close, I jumped. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I don't know what happened that night, and I don't know if I'll ever find out. All I know is that something is not right, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Every time I get in my taxi, I can't help but look in the back seat, half expecting to see someone there, but there's never anyone there, just an empty seat soaked with water.